welcome. I'm so happy to be here tonight again on Zoom with all of you. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Neria Leyva Gutierrez, and I am the Executive Director of NOMA. And for those of you who may or may not know, we are an arts service organization in Upper Manhattan, and our mission is to support artists and arts organizations and to partner with other Uptown groups on new and exciting programs. And so we continue to be thrilled to be a part of this unique, fascinating, illuminating, and timely collaboration between NOMA and Columbia University's Zuckerman Institute. You are here for our fourth installment in our Sound Waves and Brainwaves performance and dialogue series, which fascinatingly explores the intersections between jazz music and science. And tonight's program, Learning to Appreciate Musical Diversity, brings together the extraordinary Miguel Zenón, the 2009 NOMA Art Stroll honoree and jazz artist in residence at the Zuckerman Institute, and Dr. Adele Ardalan, postdoctoral research scientist also at Columbia University Zuckerman Institute, to engage in conversation around the ideas of music, culture, bias, and appreciation. And as we would like to do, and as we always do at NOMA, we want to extend the conversation to all of you. And so please, as Michelle stated, deposit all and any questions in the chat room, and we will be sure to have the opportunity to allow you to ask them. But before we begin our program, I would like to introduce, and it gives me great pleasure to do so, Dr. Paula Croxton, neuroscientist and Associate Director for Public Programs at Columbia University's Zuckerman Institute, who will tell us a bit more about the program and formally introduce this evening's featured experts. Paula.
Thank you so much, Neria. Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. I basically run the public programs for the Zuckerman Institute, which is Columbia University's Neuroscience Institute, located on 129th Street and Broadway. My mission really is to find new ways to bring science into the world, and what better way to bring science into the world than to combine it with the arts. And it's been our pleasure for the past, a little over a year now, to be working with Miguel Zenón as our jazz artist in residence. You probably also know him as a multiple Grammy nominee and a Guggenheim and MacArthur fellow, known for his absolutely unique and amazing voice as a saxophonist, a composer, and a conceptualist. So welcome, Miguel, and thanks for being with us again.
Great to be here. Hello,
and it's also my pleasure to introduce tonight's scientist, Dr. Adele Ardalan. So he's a postdoctoral research scientist at the Shan Lab at the Zuckerman Institute, and he's actually a computer scientist by training. So he sort of works at the intersection of computational neuroscience and mathematical modeling and neuroscience. And he's also a musician himself, has studied tambour, played Kurdish and Iranian strings and drums for the past 2 decades. And he just told me that this is the first time he's performed for a while. So be very nice to him. So Adele, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to hand over to the two of you now.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Thank you, and welcome, everyone. Thank you, Adele, for taking the time to join us. This is always a lot of fun for all of us. Like we usually do, I'm going to start it off with a little music. This is a piece by the great Billy Strayhorn that he co-wrote with another genius of music, the great Duke Ellington. And they wrote this for a suite called the Far East Suite. And this piece is called Isfahan. I'm going to play a little bit of this. All right. Isfahan, the great Billy Strayhorn. Always a pleasure to play it. And great to have Adele here. We were just talking about Isfahan before. He was telling me about this amazing city in Iran, full of history and full of music and arts, and it's a good way to get us started. So Adele, we've had many conversations before. I think the best way to go about this would be to try to replicate those in front of our friends, joined by our friends here. So we've been talking about learning and about musical diversity, and I would love to get your take about all this. I mean, we talked about you growing up with music as well. I mean, you're coming from the science part of it as well. I know we have many things we want to touch on, but I want to just leave it up to you and kind of get us started on the conversation. You're muted, by the way.
Thank you.
There we go.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me in the first place. This is a great privilege and a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for that beautiful piece of music. It's always great to hear you and your amazing music. So just by way of getting us started, when we were having this discussion with Miguel and going about how to get to some of the interesting aspects of connections between music and learning. This theme came up, which I think is one of the things that as a society we have been grappling with for the past few years, if not decades, and that is the issue of diversity and inclusion. And so I think maybe I'm a little biased toward that, no pun intended, but part of, or at least one of the ways that we can promote inclusion and appreciation of diversity is through music and the amazing musical traditions and cultures from around the world. And so one of the things that has been always interesting to me and very, I have been seeking it out to find out about various traditions is how the music functions in various societies. So we all are familiar with the artistic music, which is, what is played in orchestras and orchestral halls. There's also the pop music, which is, something that we, listen to it on a daily basis and enjoy it. But in a lot of places in the world, music has other functions. Like, for example, and this is, I'm giving these examples because these are the types of music I'm most familiar with. In southern Iran, fishermen use specific type of music to coordinate work. So basically, when the fish net is in the water and they have a big load of fish that they need to get out of the water, it's attached to these ropes and they need to get them out. But because it's too heavy, like 20 men need to coordinate to get these out of the water. So what happens is that they have basically incorporated music into it. So a drummer or multiple drummers do the drumming and they sing to it. And so I just wanted to play a quick sample of that music, which is quite interesting. So I am going to do it again, just to make sure that I'm doing it right. Okay. So this is the music that I was talking about, the music of the work music of fishermen of southern Iran. Basically getting prepared. So yeah, that's
so great, man. I'm sorry, that groove is just amazing.
Yeah.
What really gets me about this, Adele, I mean, I'm sure you have more to say about it, but I wanted to say when I hear this, and obviously this is a very deep tradition that's probably passed on from generation to generation and just learned from word of mouth and experience. I mean, this is kind of being a theme what a lot of this conversations has been having here. Uh, but you also get this amazing music, but in this case, the purpose of the music is totally different, right? It's not music that's for an audience. It's music that has an active kind of work related purpose, which is what's really amazing about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, this is just one example. Of course, if I'm sure if you go around the world, you will find like other examples of, the way that people incorporate music into their daily routines, really. And so it is always this particular type of music is called neyme. So and it's one of my favorite kinds of music. I listen to it, not working necessarily. I don't do fishing, but I still like music.
So Adele, Paula brought up that you came up with music too, and you play a bunch of different instruments. I know you were kind of, like holding back, but I was wondering if you could play a little for us and maybe tell us about your experience. I think tell us a little bit about your experience coming up, learning music, what that process what's like, and what it means to you now, like in your daily life now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's really nerve-wracking to be playing music in front of a maestro, but I will do my best. So yeah, I'm a Kurdish person, so I was born in Iran, in the Kurdistan part of Iran, and music has been always an integral part of my life because my one of my uncles sings, the other is a drummer, the other one plays tambour, and none of them professionally. So this is just something that they do. We basically sit around in the evening and play music, used to at least. So that was my upbringing, and it's really a very essential part of it has been an essential part of my upbringing. So I picked up this instrument that is called tambour. It's a long necked lute, and this is mostly a Kurdish instrument, has a long history that I'm not going to get into, but one of the main ways that this is played is in the rituals and prayers of people of the Yarsan faith. And so I'm just going to very quickly just do a short demo, and then I will play a piece that people use multiple tambours to perform religious rituals. All right, there we go.
Hey Adele, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
we can't really hear it. I think it's distorting a little bit. If you turn down the volume of the microphone, I think it's gonna come through better.
Let me see if I can do this.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, man. That's so great. such a great sound. It's hypnotic, you know.
Yeah, it's a very private instrument too, if you know, for individual prayers. And then, as I was saying before, then you put a bunch of them together, and then something like this will happen. Let me quickly share my screen. Yeah, so this is a band of, I don't know, however many of them, singing rituals in Kurdish. Yeah, so as you can tell, a lot of the people who were singing are not necessarily singers, trained singers, but it's part of the ritual, and everyone sings, and there is no, you know, it's the aesthetics of the music are not as important as the actual, you know, ritual and the tradition that goes into it.
Yes, yes. Music, it plays another part. You know, that's what I love when I hear this and the previous excerpt you played. I mean, there is a lot of complexity in the music, but that's not really the point. You know, it's
Yeah,
that
exactly.
complexity has been built through generations of masters passing it along to other musicians and creating this tradition. And this reminds me of a piece when you were talking about playing this clip. This reminded me of a piece from Puerto Rico that I really like that also connects to religious music and ritual music there, more connected to the Catholic religion as it, you know, found its way into Latin America and the Caribbean specifically. And in Puerto Rico, we have this thing where the rosary out of the Catholic tradition is sung, is musicalized, right? And this is an excerpt that I heard a few years back, and it kind of, you know, it blew me away mainly because of what we're talking about. You can tell there's a sense of ritual, a sense of togetherness, of music being kind of learned and performed for another purpose, but at the same time, there's a really, really deep level of you know, of complexity in the music that's almost by accident in a way, you know. Let me play a little bit of this. This was recorded in the mountains of Puerto Rico, Dios te salve Maria, in the mountains of Orocovis, which is the rural area of the island. Right. So again, there's a complexity in the music, but it's music that's really learned and performed for a different reason. And this kind of brings me back to another point you made, Adele, when we were talking, and this connects again to your experience growing up in Iran, connected to a very specific style of music, and then all of a sudden hearing something else and being kind of like, what is this? You know, why is this so different? Is this even music? You know, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is such an has been such an amazing part of my life, discovering these new types of music. And every time that you find out about a new kind of music, a new genre of music, or a new way that people utilize music in their daily living, it's such a joy that is not comparable to really anything else. So I was telling you before about this incident of a friend of mine playing for me the music of the great Ali Farka Touré, the African music basically. And before that, I didn't have any exposure to it, and I had heard like Western classical music and some other types of music, but it was not anything remotely similar to what I was hearing. So it just immediately opened this huge horizon and made me very eager to go and look out for more of that music and to look into the background, the cultural background. So part of the theme that we're talking about is trying to appreciate this musical diversity. And I think part of it is, listening to different types of music makes people more curious about each other, about different cultures, about how you conduct your life. What are for example, if someone hears the music that we played before, they want to know what that people are singing about, and what is that belief system that they're trying to express through their music. So I mean, just to pay tribute to Ali Farka Touré, we could just play a short snippet of that very first song that I listened to, because I remember, and it's probably one of the most famous pieces that almost everyone has probably heard before. But even the beginning to this day is still amazing to me. Sorry, I couldn't stop it before we get to his beautiful voice. That silky voice is just priceless. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So one thing that I get from that, Adele, I mean, it's so different than what you played before, but at the same time, it's very similar. Like the function, like the way the music kind of works. You have this string instrument, you have this leader and the call and response. There's a groove involved, but then at the same time, at the root of the music, the rhythmic subdivision is different. The way their instruments are used. So it's, I know we're gonna get into it in a minute, but another thing that came up from the conversation was this idea of bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how when we have something that's already kind of been implanted and it's very specific, right? And very kind of like one-sided in one direction, it's hard to go somewhere else. I mean, even if it's the same, we just can't see it right away,
Yeah, absolutely. So this is also something that has been, you know, the word is very loaded, of course, because a lot of people talk about bias these days. But uh, just thinking about the meaning of the word and then how it manifests in different areas, I think is an interesting practice. Bias, if we want to talk about bias, it shows up in, you know, various fields of study. We have cognitive biases in neurosciences. We have cultural biases in sociology, and then a specific kind of bias that, by way of the training that I've been more involved with is the bias that we need to deal with and be aware of in the world of machine learning. So. And those come in different flavors. A lot of them are statistical biases that I'm going to get a little bit deeper into. But just to give a very brief overview of what I'm talking about here, these days, you know, machine learning and AI are, you know, buzzwords, and everyone is hearing about them. But the idea of machine learning is very similar. It's basically saying, let's bring a bunch of components, software and hardware components of a computer, put them together, teach them through a set of instructions to do something. Let's say in this something in this case is translating, let's say, French into English. And then later on we'll ask them to do the translation, and they will do it to a, you know, to a acceptable accuracy, with an acceptable accuracy. So these different components, the actual hardware software modules, the instructions, which we call training algorithm, and the actual data that we use to do these instructions with, are different really parts of this ecosystem. And bias could happen in any of these. So you could have models that are biased, you can have training instructions that are biased, and particularly lately we have seen this phenomena in training data. So I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about all of these stories coming out of different companies and different research programs about how biases are hurting the not just these algorithms, but, you know, they have actual implications and they impact people. So
right, they impact our decisions, basically.
Exactly, absolutely. They impact our decisions. They impact our behaviors. And so this is exactly what you were referring to. So bias, you know, in its own is not a bad thing. We use biases to, let's say, focus on one thing and get really good at it. So that is the positive side of, you know, having some kind of bias to be able to focus. But then there is this negative side of it. There's ongoing research going on about ethics in machine learning and AI and technology in general. And like one of the most famous studies that came out a couple of years ago found out that some of these facial recognition algorithms, for example, were up to 34% less accurate and more error prone when detecting non-white women faces compared to white men. And so that bias, and one of the main causes of that bias is, of course, the training data, because a lot of the pictures that we can find online are of white men. And so that might end up, you know, raising a lot of false alarms. For example, if law enforcement is using those software modules to do facial recognition to, you know, discriminate against minorities. So that's one example. The other example that has been actually pretty topic of a very hot discussion lately is the language model. So, for example, Siri on your phone, it uses you know, these language models to be able to understand and generate natural language. the spoken language that we speak, in particular English. And then so these studies found that there are word associations in these models between men and career and women and family. And so this kind of imbalance does not necessarily manifest explicitly, but it implicitly affects the behavior of these systems. For example, if you ask them a question, if you ask Siri a question, it might affect the way that it frames the answer or polls the results. And then another example, I'm going to tell you this very quickly, is from my own work. So I have been working on using the newer technologies, particularly what they call pose estimation software, to study motor challenges in children with neurodevelopmental disorders. So these pose estimation software is usually built using people who have next to no motor impairments. So they are, as we call them, typically developing, which means that there is potentially this massive bias against the patterns of movement of people who actually have motor deficiencies. And we have been investigating this for the past couple of months and trying to figure out whether there is something that we can do about it, because by nature there is the lack of this training data, and a lot of this goes back to the scarceness of training data for these underrepresented populations. But it is a serious issue that we need to think about. So that kind of manifestation of bias, the negative manifestations of bias, have been something that I have been very occupied with lately.
Yeah, that's so interesting, man. And like you said, this has been so present these days because of the kind of the plays that social media and technology has in our lives in general, and the dependence up to a certain point that we've developed as a society, and especially in this side of the world, to technology. That is, it's interesting to hear that technology is also going to lean a certain way depending on how that was put together. And maybe Adele, kind of bringing it back to the music, we could talk a little bit about, we talked already about bias and some musical examples, and I wanted to play this little clip. But one thing that's important is how we see each other, right? And how we kind of learn things in a certain way depending on where we're raised, the part of the world where we're raised, and as soon as we're exposed to something new, there might be some prejudice, there might be some pushback, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when I was talking about machine learning, so I was trying to make this parallel between machine learning and the way that we learn. And the main purpose is we are kind of following the same pattern, same general pattern, in the sense that if we're only exposed to one type of culture or one type of music, it's really hard, particularly as we grow up in a homogenous society, which fortunately is less and less the case these days. But still, if we are not exposed to different types of ideas and cultures, it's really hard to try to communicate, understand, and empathize with people coming from those cultures. And so we were talking about this before, having this experience of listening to music of different cultures was really a very helpful and eye-opening vehicle for me to be able to connect with people that otherwise I might not have been able to immediately connect. So meeting this person from a different country, from a completely different background, and then the first thing that we talk about is music, and it just becomes this gateway into a deeper discussion, and then just breaking the ice really between the people, and making us both both human and engaged in a conversation that we're both interested in.
Yeah, it's like finding a common denominator between the two, something that you can connect.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that music could potentially be very helpful in the sense that you know, it could be a starting point for conversations, and it's something that is a universal language. So you don't really need to learn a whole different language to be able to communicate with people through music.
Yeah, that's great. Hey,
I'm just gonna chime in here to say we just maybe have a few more minutes before we open up to questions. So speaking of conversation, if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, or if you want to hit that raise hand button,
yes.
As the conversation goes, we'll be opening it up to all of you soon to answer your questions.
Yeah, and I would say we're about ready. I was looking at the clock. I was like, man, we're kind of like hitting like a perfect timing right here. At the 45-minute mark. I wanted to play this one clip when we were talking about bias. Before we open it up for questions, I want to play this one clip because this is something that I play for folks a lot, and it's something that has to do both with musical bias and also cultural bias. It's a clip from another African artist, the great Oumou Sangare, who's also from Mali, actually, great vocalist. And I'm just gonna play it. We can listen to it together, and then I'm gonna tell you how this hit me the first time I heard it. This is called Kumfeko. I believe this is maybe from the late '90s. This recording. Here it is. Bismillah. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Here we go. So I'm gonna stop it right there. So first time I heard it, I was probably a young guy moving to New York, probably late '90s or something. Someone played it for me or passed me along a record or something, and there was something about it that was familiar and something that wasn't. So when I started hearing that groove, I was hearing it in a very specific place in the beat. I was hearing I don't know why. And when I think about it, obviously I had all this information, all this bias kind of thing telling me this is what that is. And that's how it works with music. You gravitate towards what's familiar. So for me, that was what's familiar. To do it, and I heard it I kept hearing the track and I was like, yeah, this is so groovy. And one day, something clicked and I started hearing it where it was. And I was like, wait, this thing that I've been, and I was like, this thing that I've been hearing this whole time is totally wrong. He wasn't even close. That was the thing. I could hear, there was a groove, but I was hearing something else. That's what they're playing. Yeah. So it was like, when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, I've been hearing this wrong this whole time. But in a way, it was almost like rediscovering the track again. And then I could just kind of like groove. But what's funny about this is now I hear this track and I could go both sides. I could go, this is the old way and this is the new way. This is the right way, but this is the
now I can too.
So, I mean, when we were talking about bias, this always comes up because I like to bring it basically when we were saying, music, like anything else, is always going to gravitate towards the familiar, towards what you know. And eventually, as you open up and gather more information, then you start seeing other things that maybe weren't there because maybe they were too close or too far or too unfamiliar, In any case, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions. I think maybe there might be something in the chat or maybe not. We could unmute whatever folks feel like. We would love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments.
Yeah, I think we have a question from Meg Jahani.
Mm.
Would you like to
Yeah.
ask your question?
Yeah, you
Hi,
can
this
go
is
ahead and
Murad.
unmute.
Yeah, can you
Cool.
hear me? Perfect.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
So
we can.
it is interesting and known phenomena about bias in human learning versus machine learning. So I just wanted to understand how we process music, known music versus the music that we are not exposed to, right? The neural correlates of music, especially.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I that's one of the that's one of my lifelong goals of basically be able to make those models and understand those behaviors. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to do a lot of research into that area. And plus, this is something that I have learned over the past couple of years being in Zuckerman Institute, that music, because of its very multifaceted and complex nature, is very hard to measure, particularly the way that neuroscientists and scientists in general would like to do it, which is in a very controlled way and being able to, just change one parameter and see what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the most, and I think this has come up in the previous iterations of this meeting, one of the most interesting pieces of work that I've seen that touches on your question has been a multi-year long project that Nori Jacobi, who is now in Germany, I think in Max Planck.
He's in Frankfurt, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So he had conducted this study over a pretty sizable sample of people from different cultures, and trying to assess their rhythmic perceptions and play various rhythms for them, and then ask them to try to repeat it by either tapping or singing to it. And I would highly recommend looking at some of the results that he had. But you can definitely see. Well, there were, to be honest, there are no neural correlates in that particular study. But from a behavioral perspective, they are very, very interesting in the sense that you can clearly see that a lot of people, as Miguel was talking about, fall back to their biases, fall back to the type of rhythms that they know already. They have been more exposed to. And there are also some studies, I think these are a little older, by Scott McKay in UCSD using EEG. Those are a little older, and I don't exactly remember whether they do a ton of longer pieces, but if I remember correctly, they do some brain signaling and try to correlate that with the way that people react to music. But again, because of the complexity of the subject matter, it's really difficult to study musical perception, at least with the tools and techniques that we have these days. Paula, you're probably much more versed in all of this than I am. So please chime in. And I think at some point Mike was here, and he would definitely know much more than I do.
Yeah, Mike might know more than me. I mean, I think you're right. The complexity of music makes it really hard to unpack it and understand what exactly. And I don't think anybody has done that study about familiar versus unfamiliar music. So I can only tell you how the brain processes familiar and unfamiliar other things. So we have a lot of research on familiar versus unfamiliar, like visual stimuli, for example, and it seems as if, I mean, we're wired to learn, right? So although we may process new things differently, we also find new things very salient, very interesting, sometimes rewarding. Sometimes there's reward signals associated with new things that stimulate learning to happen more rapidly. So yeah, I guess as maybe a follow-up, I feel like I was brought up in a really sort of European centric musical environment, being from England, and So what are some of the ways that I could broaden my horizons and you know, lose my biases and take advantage of that brain plasticity that I have?
Great.
I have a question. I find this also interesting, and I wonder what the connection is with language, like when you try to learn a new language, right? So, you know, if you're a Romance language person, you know, I took German, for example, and, you know, it was so outside of my, you know, sort of comfortable place in terms of, you know, I mean, although I know English, so it should have been a more connected experience, but I know Spanish. And so, you know, I could hear in French, I could hear in Italian a lot of connections with Spanish. But when I heard German, I was trying to hear in the German language things that would connect to my understanding of Spanish. So I would pronounce things with a Spanish accent, you know, and I would sort of pick things up. But that was my experience. And then I would see sort of somebody who was, I found to be a multilingualist, you know, somebody who was just good at languages and who could hear the variations, right, in the language of German and sort of be able to take on those aspects of language. How does the brain make those distinctions? I mean, there are distinctions. I mean, there are some people who are primed to hear those sounds, you know, the familiar and only the familiar, and then those others who can distinguish with, you know, among the familiar and the not so familiar. What does the brain do in those circumstances?
I think you're muted. No, okay. But we lost you for a second. I don't know why.
Is it possible your microphone needs a little boost?
You have anything to add to this, Paula? Well, he
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you
Oh,
go.
we
There you go.
can, yes.
Okay.
Oh, you're gone again.
Or you're gone again.
We've lost you again.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, what I was about to say was I'm not very knowledgeable about this, so I might just defer to Paula. But at some point, I will come back to this idea of at least the ways that I have tried to familiarize myself with other types of music. Just very briefly before we go to the other direction. And this also relates back to what Paula was talking about. My experience with trying to explore other types of music have usually gone, well, two more salient ways that have happened to me. One has been through dance. So I was talking to Miguel before, and one of the treasure troves of music, of international music that I found out was this music of Argentine tango. And the reason that I found out about this music was because I started dancing tango. And so that music is an amazing body of beautiful pieces and rhythms. So that's one. And the other one is what has been happening during the past couple of decades, which is the collaborations between different musicians from different cultures. And so you have this music that you're kind of familiar with, and then there's this other component that you're not that familiar, but when they play together, you start to recognize it more and more. So because I am dying to share this piece of music with you, I'm just gonna very quickly play this thing very quickly. So this is kora. This is African kora, and then the Iranian upright fiddle called kamancheh. Can you guys hear it?
Yes.
So up to here, they're playing mostly African music, and then the Iranian music starts right here.
Yeah, that's so great. I was thinking about this, Neria, when you were asking this question about language, and I've had this conversation a bunch with a lot of folks in the institute, including Mike Shatlin, who's here. I think. Hey, Mike, how you doing? One thing that when I think about language, I think about improvisation a lot, and I was hearing these musicians play now, and it's obviously. I mean, it's obvious that they're playing different musical languages, but they're also improvising. And while they're improvising, they're trying to find each other, trying to find a key center, trying to find a rhythm, trying to find a groove. And this is something that I experienced when I started playing jazz, coming from playing Caribbean and Puerto Rican music, and also that I experienced when I started to learn how to speak English, for example, where you had an idea, but you kind of had to, construct it with the information that you had available. And as language became more available, that you could communicate better, So I could definitely relate to what you were saying about learning a new language. Both for me, it was both from a language standpoint, but also from a musical standpoint, like learning to play another style of music that wasn't your own and trying to get familiar with the language enough that you could actually communicate. So this is a longish conversation for sure.
Yeah, it's so
um,
fascinating to me. I think there's a follow-up question. This is, again, this multilinguistic versus a regular person. The question is wondering about how expert musicians process music versus normal people, the non-expert.
yeah, that's a great question.
It's a hard thing to know if you're an expert, I
Yeah.
guess. How do you?
This is one of the first questions I asked Mike when we met for the first time, and I came into the institute, and it's something that's so interesting to me, not only in terms of like non-musicians versus musicians, but also a musicians versus a more experienced musician, for example, if they experience music differently, if they experience rhythm or harmony or groove differently, and we were actually like thinking about running some experiments with Mike and a couple of the folks at the institute, trying to see what would happen if you played one groove or one snippet of music for two musicians at different levels of musicianship. How would that affect how they would perceive that? Actually, one of the groups we were working with was that Omu Sangaya group that I played earlier, because it was one of those groups that could live in a lot of places. So I don't know the answer, but I definitely have the same questions.
And I will say, if you're an expert musician who performs, there's more of a sort of multimodal experience. We do know that if you image the brain of somebody who plays music, they're more likely to also experience activation in their motor cortex, their premotor cortex, the areas of the brain that prep you to play, that get you ready to play. So there's something there about potentially using more of our brain. I also remember reading a study where visual cortex, visual areas are more active in people listening to music. We all actually experience some visual cortex activation when we listen to music, but if you are used to reading music, sheet music, then you're more likely to get activation in these other areas. So it really depends, you know, what you were used to using. I don't know if there have been any studies on dancers, but I bet there would be a similar phenomenon. Such a great question.
That's so cool. How are we doing with time?
So we're at 8:34. So we've been talking about music. I think we'd love to hear music. Yes?
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
close it out with some music before we say
Yeah,
goodbye.
let's hear it. Let's hear it.
So I played this piece Isfahan, which is the name of the city in Iran, to honor our friend Adele for being here and giving us his time and his knowledge today. And now I want to close out with a piece that's in reference to a town in Puerto Rico, the town of Fajardo, which is in the east sort of coast of Puerto Rico. And this is it's more than a song. It's more like a sub style of a larger family of music from Puerto Rico called música jíbara or música campesina, music from the rural areas of Puerto Rico. This is called Seis Fajardeño. I'm gonna play a little snippet on this form, see how it feels. All right. Say
Bravo, bravo.
Brings me back home. Thank you all. Thank you.
Fabulous.
I can't think of a better way to end this evening. That was perfect. Thank you so much. I love this series and I love collaborating with you. It brings me so much pleasure and I learn so much and I always leave feeling incredibly inspired and just illuminated. So thank you so much, Miguel. Thank you so much, Adele. Thank you so much, Paula. We are so happy and honored to have you here with us tonight. And thanks to all of you for being here. It's been a pleasure, and we'll be back at it in a month from today, I think, the March 22nd for our fifth of this wonderful series that we are enjoying tremendously, Sound Waves and Brain Waves. So come back on the 22nd of March. Thank you for being here. And thank you so much to all of you, Adele, Paula, and Miguel, for being here tonight. This was truly extraordinary. Good night, everyone. And we will see you soon. Michelle has put in the chat how you can find out more information about our next series. We look forward to having you join us then. Good night. And we hope you listen to these wonderful sounds from tonight's evening for the rest of your night and maybe through the weekend or through the week. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Take care, everybody.